Hayden. In our work as wealth advisors for doctors, we focus on a variety of things. There's wealth enhancement, wealth transfer, but tonight's
Hey,
webinar will
Hayden.
focus on wealth protection.
Hayden, can I have you restart? Because now we're live.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks, Amber. Greetings and welcome to Simplifying Practice Management for a Successful 2025. I'm Hayden Warren. I've been working with dentists for over 40 years, and it was about that long ago that I met Bent Erickson. The firm's evolved over the decades, and it's now owned by Tim, Adrian, and Alan Twigg. I've always told clients that engaging the services of Bent Erickson and Associates is cheap insurance to protect oneself from potential labor-related problems. I'm sure everyone has had or heard horror stories. In our work as wealth advisors for doctors, we focus on a variety of things. There's wealth enhancement and wealth transfer, but tonight's webinar will focus on wealth protection, protecting one's practice and personal assets from labor-related problems. I'm happy to introduce Alan Twigg, who will take us through many important aspects of managing your practice's HR department and who will give you an HR action plan that you can put into place tomorrow. Alan Twigg.
Yeah, thank you, Hayden. And thank you all for being here, and super excited to talk about this topic. It's one of my favorites. May not be your favorite, but it is very important nonetheless. So excited to dive into this. So we'll be going through a few different things tonight, and we've got a chat feature going. So if you guys have any questions, drop them in there, and we'll have some time at the end to go over that as well. And so here's our agenda, and we're just going to dive right in. So tonight's context for this is a little past, present, future. So we've obviously been through the pandemic and the Great Resignation, all the chaos of the labor shortages and people resigning and so on. And what we're seeing right now is that things are a little bit more stable than they were during the pandemic, which is great. But we're still seeing a lot of labor shortages, and we're still seeing issues with not enough graduates coming out of accredited programs and so on. Earlier this year, I was at an event at the University of Washington Dental School, and the ADA was there, and they were putting up some data here about sort of the forecast for where are we going in the future. And this slide is some data from the ADA and also from the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics. The left-hand column is what the Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates will be the annual number of job openings in these various categories, specifically hygiene and assisting. And then the middle column represents the number of graduates who came out of accredited programs in 2019. And of course, you can see for hygiene and assisting, the numbers are pretty scary. Now, of course, there's this thing about accredited versus not accredited, certain positions in certain states and all of that. But the bottom line here is that the staffing shortages in dentistry specifically are not expected to get better anytime soon. Now, another thing that came out of this was that about a third of the dental assistant and hygienist workforce are expected to retire in the next 5 years or less. So that, of course, isn't going to make the staffing shortage any better. And then the study here also looked at factors associated with retention, and that included things that are fairly obvious, like work-life balance and culture. And then they also looked at factors associated with attrition, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of these tonight. Now, unfortunately, the labor shortage is not the only big HR challenge that is affecting dentistry right now, today, and in the future. So one of the things that we track and monitor is state and federal labor laws. And when there are changes in those state and federal labor laws, we send out new updated policies to all of our clients. And in the period from 2014 through the end of 2018, we sent out 74 policy updates, and this was nationwide. And I know a lot of folks on the webinar tonight are from California. You received a disproportionately high share of these. Now, in the period from 2019 through 2023, though, it was 280. So a lot of people sometimes hear this and think, well, maybe this was all due to COVID. It was not due to COVID. This was a whole bunch of new rules around paid sick leave, paid family leave, protections for pregnancy and disability. And so far for this year, 2024, we're seeing this trend continue. And so it's just a reminder about how these HR labor laws don't just sit there static. They do change quite a bit. In addition to that, we sometimes think that dentistry is immune from labor lawsuits, labor liability, and it's not. Here are just some headlines from some dental specific issues that came up. The top one there was actually just from a couple months ago, and that one especially was 100% preventable. The employer in that case did some stuff that they weren't supposed to do. The dental manager was not, going out to extract some kind of revenge on this practice. It was just that they really screwed up, and it led to a lawsuit. So the takeaway from this, from our perspective, is that today's HR is challenging. Your team has become your primary source of competitive advantage, and it means that today's HR is all about long-term retention, and it's also about compliance and risk management. The retention piece is if we can retain our good people, it means we don't have to go out into this crazy labor market and try to find someone. And then, of course, the compliance piece is also then about avoiding lawsuits and avoiding stress and expenses and so on. Now, as a little bit of a framework for HR, so here's kind of how we sometimes, do a high-level overview of this. So you have people leadership and organizational culture. We'll talk about that a little bit tonight. You have employment compliance. Of course, that's super important. We'll talk a lot about that tonight. Once we have those foundational pieces in place, we can do our recruiting and hiring and onboarding and bring people into our practice. Once we have them, then it's a matter of managing their performance. And then it's also about building on that to have engagement, appreciation, and recognition. And those first two are really foundational. Absolutely every practice has got to have those, no matter your size, no matter your stage of growth. Everybody needs that. And then the last three are really, though, the building blocks for success. Those are what are going to take your practice from good to great. And whatever your goals are long term, as far as a certain amount of money you want to achieve, happiness, life, satisfaction, work-life balance, dropping insurance, whatever those big long-term goals are, those last three and having a really solid team in place are what are going to get you to that point. So the primary goal of people leadership is about long-term retention of quality employees. Now, I underline quality because we are not interested in retaining bad employees or mediocre employees. And it's really important that everyone out there that's in practice leadership understands how detrimental turnover is to the success of your practice. Turnover impacts your time, revenues, performance, patient care. It's a huge, huge impact on your office. And unfortunately, a lot of times in Facebook groups and other, organizations, this kind of mindset circulates that turnover is just inevitable and there's absolutely nothing that we can do about it. And it's just a necessary part of life. And that's not true. And we hear other similar things about people just don't want to work these days. You just can't find good people. Nobody wants to work for a regular, salary and so on. And that's just not true. There are a lot of good workers out there, and there are a lot of wonderful people that want to further their career, provide for their families, and be a part of a really awesome practice. And we just have to foster the environment where those people can come in and thrive. Now, I want you to get your phones out if you don't have them out already, and I want you to take a picture of this slide. This is what's called the Gallup Q12. Gallup has studied the factors that lead to high employee retention and, by translation, avoid turnover. When these 12 elements are in place, you will boost your employee retention. And you'll notice that these elements are not really out there, really crazy. I mean, the first one alone, I know what's expected of me at work. That's not that crazy, but that is so basic and so important that statistically, again and again, when Gallup does this, that shows up as something really critical in there. And you'll also notice other things on here. My number 5, my boss or supervisor or someone seems to care about me as a person. That doesn't cost any money, and it doesn't really take a whole lot of time. So think of this as a homework assignment for you. I want you to look at this later and go down this list and check off which ones you can really achieve in your practice, or which ones you haven't achieved yet. Now, another thing in this world of people leadership is appreciation. And if you haven't read this book, I would highly recommend that you get it immediately. This is the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace. If you're familiar with a book called The 5 Love Languages, this is that same concept applied to the workplace. Now, we won't go into all the ins and outs of these languages and how they all work, but the gist is that everyone likes to receive appreciation in different ways. In my case, I'm a quality time person. I really like to sit down with someone when there's no distractions and we're not under a time crunch, and we can really have a good quality discussion about something. Other people, it might be gifts, and they really want to receive a good, tangible gift that's unique to them. Physical touch, we're not going to talk about that very much. Physical touch in the workplace amounts to high fives and fist bumps. So as you can imagine, that chapter in the book is very short. Now, grab your phone and take a picture of this. This is just 10 examples of some different ways of expressing appreciation. This is a whole mishmash of different languages. And I will tell you, with number 7, when we were at that event at the University of Washington School of Dental, there was a doctor in the audience, and he shared that he spends on average about $100 a week on coffee for his team. His team likes Starbucks, they like lattes and mochas and so on. So it's about $100 a week. And if you multiply that out by about 50 weeks a year, that's $5,000 per year just on coffee. And some people might hear that and go, that's insane. I would never spend $5,000 a year on coffee just for my team. But we asked him, do you feel like you're getting an ROI on this? And he said, without any question, yes. I'm getting happier employees. I'm not having to hire as much, good retention, less turnover. And ultimately, he said he feels like he gets much better patient care because his employees feel appreciated. And it's just one of these little things that's just in the line item in his budget, and it's no big deal. Here's another list of another 10 easy ways to express appreciation. Feel free to take a picture of this as well. It's not about doing all of these per se. It's about finding the ones that work for you. And you'll also notice when you dive into this that these are not things that take a huge amount of time or money. So another little homework assignment for you. But this appreciation stuff really makes a massive difference. I don't have a slide up for this, but Gallup, when they do all their surveys about what employees want, feeling valued and appreciated is right up at the top. It's right up there with salary and benefits and work-life balance, work schedule, and so on. So it's really important to invest in that appreciation piece. Now, there are some additional benefits of all of this people leadership stuff that we've just talked about. The way it works is you have a happy team that leads to high retention, that leads to having a really awesome reputation among employees. Workers do talk. And if you have a good reputation in the community as being an awesome place to work, people will actually seek you out. That'll make your whole recruiting process faster and easier. And all of these elements form what is called your UEP, your unique employment proposition. You've probably spent time on your USP, your unique selling proposition. Why should a patient choose your practice versus the practice down the street? And I'm sure you can articulate that about your technology, your training, your office, and so on. Your UEP is just as important. You need to be able to articulate to a really great high quality candidate why they should choose your practice versus the practice down the street. And you need to come up with a list. You need to come up with some descriptive words and some sort of a sense of how you would put that into words, so that if you're in the hiring process, in your job postings, in your interviews, and certainly in your onboarding process, you want to be able to communicate that UEP, because it's so critical because of how crazy the labor market is right now. And I will also say one other thing too, because there's been a lot of talk about money and higher wages, higher salaries for dental positions. And I love a quote by Dan Clark, which is, if they come for money, they will leave for money. So keep in mind that the reasons why people stick around, yes, they need competitive money and competitive benefits, but it is ultimately about the culture and your people leadership side of the practice. That is what will have people stick around, and that is what will attract awesome candidates to your practice. All right, we're going to switch gears now and talk a little bit about employment compliance. So in terms of where employment compliance comes from, number one, employment compliance comes from the federal level and the state level. And if you're joining us from San Francisco or Los Angeles or some of the other areas where there are city or county HR laws, you may have some HR rules that come in from that as well. But the bulk of the employment compliance rules come from federal and state. And that sometimes sets up a little bit of a question of, well, what if federal and state differ? Which one do I follow? And the answer is you follow the one that is the most stringent, which is the one that most benefits the employee. So there's not a set thing that you always follow state or you always follow federal. You have to do that little analysis each time. The second piece with this is that it is based on the employee threshold, or how many employees you have in your practice. And so these HR rules will vary up and down based on how many employees you have. So this is really important as you grow, or if you buy an additional location and your overall employee count goes up, you need to make sure that you're following this correctly. And we have up here, all it takes is one, because all it takes is one employee, and about 95% of all the HR rules and laws apply to your practice. We also say that all it takes is one employee to get mad, get frustrated, get upset, to report you for some sort of violation, and you can be in a world of pain. And the last piece with this is that employment compliance is always changing. We touched on this a minute ago. It is something that is always in the works. They're changing existing laws and they're adding new laws. And on that note, if you want to scan this QR code, this will take you to a thing where you can subscribe to our newsletter. Our newsletter comes out monthly. It's pretty simple and easy to follow, and it's just some basic good stuff in HR, some of the latest trends that are out there. So feel free to subscribe to that if you want a little bit more resources. Now we're going to be covering some case studies tonight, and I think there is tremendous value in learning from others as far as what to do and what not to do. So with this case study, what happened here was an employee named Maggie was hired a couple years prior as a billing specialist. And she was one of these employees that was amazing at her job. She was incredibly good at all of the billing work that she did, much better and more efficient than the other employees. But she was also one of these employees that was kind of toxic and didn't really get along well with her other coworkers. And there were other employees that were in kind of the front office area that quit because they just couldn't stand to work with her. The doctor finally realized that he needed to terminate her because he was churning over all these people. So unfortunately, though, he delayed the termination. This happens a lot because he had just hired a new person that was going to kind of take over for Maggie, and he wanted to wait a little bit for this new person to get more up to speed. Unfortunately, while he was waiting, Maggie's child was diagnosed with depression, which where this practice was located, state disability protections, employee threshold, and so on, this was a protected condition, and her need for intermittent leave was protected. That meant that if he tried to terminate her immediately for the poor job performance, he was going to set himself up for an unfortunate labor claim. So that meant that he had to wait a little bit until this issue with her child could work itself out. And unfortunately, during that time, this other employee resigned. And so it's one of these examples of the different nuances that come into play with HR, and this leads to our recommendation for the necessary components, in a sense, the bare minimum that every practice needs to stay safe and stay out of trouble. The first piece with this is you've got to have a policy manual or an employee handbook. And when I say a policy manual, I mean a real policy manual, not something that's 10 years old, not something that's 5 pages long, not something that you downloaded off the internet. It needs to be a real solid document. Real policy manuals have 3 types of policies. They have required policies. These are policies that are based on state laws and federal laws. These need to be obviously current and up to date. They need to take into account that employee threshold, because some of those state rules apply maybe when you have 5 or more employees or 10 or more employees. But in a different state, similar laws might kick in when you only have 3 or when you have 6. It's also really important that your policy manual spells out all of your benefits, and those have to be absolutely crystal clear. We cannot have any misunderstandings about, oh, I thought I got PTO after 6 months instead of a year, or when they're eligible for in-house dental benefits. These things absolutely have to be crystal clear, because it's so important, especially with new hires, that we are avoiding misunderstandings. Misunderstandings are incredibly toxic, especially for new employees. And then a policy manual also has to spell out all of your management policies, all the things around smoking, appearance, uniform, cell phone usage. All of that has to be customized for your practice, your expectations, so that we set everyone up for success. And really importantly, we have consistency and fairness, so that every employee in each situation is treated the same. And of course, all of these have to be properly written and properly kept up to date over time. So the next piece with this is job descriptions. Job descriptions are one of the unsung heroes in HR. Job descriptions set up not only the duties for each position, they also need to spell out the attitude requirements. That is something that is often missed in a lot of job descriptions. Things like the ability to work well with others, the ability to accept constructive criticism. Those are things that we often deal with as employee issues, not so much the technical side of the job. And it's really important that those are in the job description. The other thing that's really important is physical requirements, things like the ability to sit or stand for long periods of time, hand dexterity, the ability to see and hear. Those lead to the job description meeting the ADA requirements. And in this case, ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act. That is super important when handling things like pregnancy, workplace injuries, any sort of pregnancy leave, disability, and so on. And it also leads all the way back to this thing that we touched on earlier of just this basic Gallup Q12 thing of I know what is expected of me at work. And the job description is really important with that. The next piece here is personnel forms. So here's a little case study on paperwork. So in this case, this doctor hired an employee named Sarah, terminated an employee named Sarah for poor job performance. Now, in the termination meeting, Sarah was really defensive, was blaming other employees, blaming the practice. It wasn't my fault. I'm sure some of you have been through terminations like that. It's certainly not fun. Unfortunately, then, the doctor did receive one of these scary letters from a law firm that said they were representing Sarah. They were going to sue because of wrongful termination. The practice was a horrible place, blah, blah, blah. Now, these scary letters are becoming more and more common in dental. We actually had a client receive one from a law firm, and it was one of these law firms that churn these things out so frequently that in the letter they sent to this practice, there was a paragraph where they forgot to fill in the practice's name, and it was a totally different business in that paragraph. It was like a pizza restaurant or something. So there are law firms out there that just send these things out just all the time. And what happened in this particular case was this doctor had his ducks in a row. So he provided his attorney with copies of his policy manual, which Sarah had signed off on, the job description, which Sarah had signed off on, some signed documentation, some written warnings that were outlining Sarah's performance issues. So the doctor provided that to his attorney sent it to this law firm, and the outcome was the law firm dropped it and they didn't hear from Sarah ever again. So I know that this HR stuff around manuals and job descriptions and forms, it's not sexy, it's not exciting, but this is why this stuff is so important. Because law firms that are out there that do these cases where they send this stuff out, they do not pursue cases where the practice has their ducks in a row. And it's just so important for just basic compliance and also for setting basic expectations with the team, having everyone on the same page. That's why this stuff is so important. Now, number 4 for necessary components is ongoing updates. Again, we touched on this earlier. It is so important that you have some kind of mechanism for staying up to date with these changing rules and laws. And unfortunately, this is one of those areas that is really hard to do yourself, because you, number one, have to get notified when there is a change in the law. You then have to get the text of the bill from the state legislature. You then have to comb through it. These things are 50 or 100 pages long, and you then have to write a policy based on that. So this is one where we'll talk a little bit more later about outsourcing, but this is one that's really hard to do yourself, but it is so important in today's labor landscape. And then the last piece with this is what we call HR specialist support. And an HR specialist is basically someone who actually knows what they're doing, who you can lean on when you have HR questions or situations come up that you've never handled before. In terms of things to look for, you want to look for someone that has what's called a SHRM or an HRCI certification. SHRM stands for the Society of Human Resource Management. HRCI is the HR Certification Institute. These are two different bodies that really are kind of the gold standard in HR and HR training. People who have these certifications have to go through an exam, and then they have ongoing CE. What those certifications lead to is really kind of the book smarts and really the knowledge about compliance and HR and history and all these different things. But what you also want to look for with an HR specialist is street smarts. That's someone who's actually been in the trenches as a manager. They've been across the table from an employee and looked them in the eye and actually had to fire people, hire people, deal with performance issues, and so on. You obviously, in this, ideally want someone who has some dental specific knowledge. That makes the whole process faster and more efficient, saves a lot of your time. Ideally, these people would be available via phone and email for a mixture of responses. If you're tied up with patients, maybe you can fire off an email and get a response. And of course, for some issues, you need to be able to talk to someone on the phone because it's way faster and easier. It's also really critical that an HR specialist resource has a fast response time. If somebody comes into work intoxicated, if 2 employees get into a fight, you can't wait 3 or 4 days to get a response from someone. So whatever your resource is in this, you've got to be able to get a response really quickly. And it needs to just be ideally available just on an as-needed basis, meaning it's not something where you have to jump through a bunch of hoops, to set something up. It's just there, and you can pick up the phone and someone's there to answer your question. Now, in this whole landscape of HR and compliance and so on, if you're curious and you want to learn a little bit more about all of this stuff, this is a QR code for our podcast. We do a podcast that comes out about every other week. It's just some general HR information on a whole variety of topics like CE, interview questions, hiring tips, compliance, and so on. So feel free to subscribe to that and listen if you are curious. And of course, it's all free. Now, in terms of keeping your practice safe, there's the old expression that knowledge is power. That's true up to a certain extent. Knowledge is power when it's put into action. And so what I hope you all take away from the webinar tonight is the importance of really taking action. And the goal tonight is that you are moving your practice forward in these areas of HR and really moving the needle so that you can set yourself up for success and avoid issues. Now, if you're interested in working with us, we make it super easy. We have something that we call the HR Director Package. It has these 5 areas that I outlined earlier. Our HR specialists do have that book smarts and the street smarts. All of them were managers of organizations of varying sizes, from small business up to giant multi-location and multi-state businesses. And the way it works with us is we start by getting your account set up in our cloud-based system. That gets you access to the job descriptions and the forms immediately. It also gets you access to the HR specialists right away. So if you are dealing with some sort of pressing issue or you're in the midst of hiring, you can get resources immediately. We then pair you with an onboarding specialist and we write your new compliant policy manual, and we do all of the legwork of doing that. We just need your time to review it. And then you can present the manual to the team. You can have them sign off on it either electronically in the system or on a paper acknowledgement form. And then you can also receive ongoing updates and HR specialist access for 1 year. The HR specialist access is unlimited. So let's summarize all of this in terms of your HR action plan. I love this quote by Brene Brown that we are not meant to do all of this alone. I think dentistry can become kind of a lonely profession, and we sometimes think that we have to do everything ourselves. And by working with a company like ours, you will be able to achieve all of this stuff with the least amount of your time spent. I think that what this is about really is not doing everything yourself. It's about finding companies and others that share your values and share your beliefs. And you are not meant to do all of this on your own. It's not meant to be all on your shoulders. All right, so here's your action plan, your homework from this. I want you to set aside about 20 minutes and a cup of coffee, and I want you to work on that UEP, that unique employment proposition. Why should a high quality candidate choose your practice versus the one down the street? There's no right or wrong to this. Every practice is different. Maybe your practice is super family friendly and you want it to be a real fun, positive, laughing atmosphere. Maybe you want your practice to be an extremely professional office where we see very high-end cases and it's a very polished atmosphere. There's no right or wrong with this, but just figure out what your UEP is, document that, and start incorporating that into your job postings and your interview process. If you have a policy manual, review that. Get rid of any old, outdated language. If you have language in there that says you're not allowed to discuss your wages and working conditions with each other, get that out of there. That's not compliant under the National Labor Relations Act. And certainly if you don't have a policy manual, make sure that you get one. Double check your job descriptions if you have them and add in those attitude requirements and the physical requirements. That's super important. Make sure that you're always documenting everything and make sure that you're doing everything you can to avoid misunderstandings. Also, make sure that you're establishing some kind of mechanism for staying up to date with all of these changing laws. And I highly recommend outsourcing what you can, because you can't outsource everything. There are companies out there that say, oh, we're going to take over everything and you won't have to do anything. The reality is you can't outsource everything in the HR space. There will be employees who need counseling. There will be employees who need a performance review. There are certain parts of the interview and onboarding process that you just can't outsource. If an employee is claiming harassment or discrimination, you need somebody who is in the practice, a compassionate person who's properly trained, who can sit down with that person and handle that situation. There are things, though, that you can outsource. You can outsource some of the compliance pieces, policy manuals, job descriptions, updates, obviously working with your payroll company or a company like Thomas Dahl with some of the work they do around payroll and other things. You can outsource a whole bunch of stuff to make your life easier, but outsource what you can, because you can't outsource everything. Be really careful with terminations, because at will alone is not enough. You need that documentation, you need the policy manuals and the other pieces in order to actually protect yourself. Make sure that you're learning protected classes. We didn't touch on this a whole lot tonight, but protected classes are those areas like pregnancy or a family member that has a medical condition. These are going to vary widely all over the country based on how many employees you have, the state that you're in, and so on. But you've got to learn those so that you know what those protected classes are and when you can take action and when you can't. And in the hiring process, this is an old adage, but make sure that you're taking your time and hiring for fit and attitude. Hire for the things that you can't train. We also highly recommend establishing a budget for employee engagement. This thing about appreciation in the workplace, this idea of coffee, whatever it is, set a budget. Doesn't matter what it is, but put that in your budget and start small and maintain that steady momentum. Don't try to go big right off the bat. Just start small. It's like working out. You just do little bits at a time and you maintain that steady momentum. And ultimately, that will lead to these positive outcomes with your team. And in terms of the benefits of all of this for your employees, it's about creating an environment where all of these things are in place. And then for you, it's about litigation prevention. It's about improved morale. And ultimately, it's about greater profitability. And the most important thing is that it's about peace of mind. When people have all of these HR pieces in place, what they consistently say is they just feel relaxed, they feel confident, and they know that they have their bases covered. All right, so with that, I am going to turn it over to Hayden to talk a little bit more about wealth management.
Have to unmute.
Oh, there you are. Hey, Hayden.
Nice job, Alan. Really important and useful information. And I'm sure we're going to have some questions at the end. I have a couple, but I'll save them up. So practice integrated wealth management, what really is that? It's using the power of your practice to create the wealth you need to achieve your personal, financial, and professional goals. Wealth management's a buzzword for a lot of folks, but for us as fiduciary advisors, it's a real thing. It includes very advanced planning and tax smart investment consulting.
You want me to go for it here? There you go.
This slide's really important because it emphasizes the value of having a team of professional advisors. The advisors on the screen are all folks at Thomas Dahl and Earned Wealth, and we think that having them under the same roof and working from the same playbook really helps clients achieve a excellent long-term outcome in their financial planning. We joined Earned Wealth, Thomas Dahl did, back in June, and we did so we could provide more advanced planning and services for our clients. I've told many folks over the years, my partners and I, we used to go away on partner retreat. Sometimes we'd go across town to a hotel and get a conference room. Other times we'd go away. But we'd always come up with lots of fantastic ideas. Then we'd go back to work Monday morning and get right back onto the treadmill. So you've heard the term failure to implement, FTI. It's really hard to implement ideas and initiatives without a lot of support. And Earned Wealth has really brought that to the table for us. We have a lot of great ideas. They do too, but they have a really outstanding team that takes our lead. They create a game plan around ideas that we have, and they make sure that the best ones we come up with are implemented. It's really a new way of life for us, and we think it's going to be beneficial for our clients going forward. Certainly hope so. Oh, I'm not telling you when to advance slides, Alan. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. I'm trying to guess, but just tell me something. We can have a code word.
So the next slide is one that I just talked about where we joined Earned Wealth. This slide just kind of illustrates some of the advanced planning tools that we have that help our clients. And, they'll deploy some of these things. Other clients will deploy others. And there's no particular order because each client has their own unique set of circumstances. And then the next slide just illustrates that, having all of us under one roof with the retirement planning, the financial planning, tax, payroll and accounting really helps our clients and their families and practices. It's really important that we have things coordinated in our office. It just makes things really streamlined, and um, it's hard to illustrate the importance of working on a tax return, needing some numbers from the retirement plan department, and just the benefit of being able to walk down the hall and say, hey, Joe, what's my number for Dr. Smith? It really, really works out well. So I want to thank Alan and everyone at Ben Erickson and Associates, which would include Tim and Adrian, and then our team with Shay Wadsworth and Amber Eckerfield for making the whole thing happen, putting everything together. So many emails back and forth to Alan and me, and getting slides set up and so forth. So thanks for those guys, and thanks everybody for listening in. I hope there were some good tips. I know there were from Alan, and hopefully we've got some good questions to pose along the way here.
Awesome. Well, let's see. Let me stop the sharing here, and then let's see. Yeah, we'll stay on for a little bit here. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and drop them in the comments thing, and happy to answer any of your questions about any of this stuff.
Alan, you mentioned that probably lots of folks listening are in California, but it raised the question for me, how many states are you working in?
We are in all 50 states. So yeah, we're in all, well, technically it's 51 states because of the District of Columbia and all that. But yeah, we're in all the states, and yeah, we've got clients all over. We have clients mostly in the dental field. About 95% of our clients are dentists. And then we've got a variety of medical offices as well. And I would say that most of our clients are on the smaller end, less than 50 employees, in that range. And it's all that we do. We're passionate about HR and HR compliance, and look forward to helping folks out with that.
Well, as I mentioned at the outset, we help people with the initial purchase of a practice, and I've always told clients that having a strong HR department, which is you guys, is just cheap insurance. And you think about some of the things that you insure, obviously the practice and your professional liability and cars and all that stuff. This is no different, in my opinion.
Right.
Do you get questions from clients about independent contractor versus employee?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the contractor employee thing is a very common one, and I'll just say on that one real quick that that it, number one, it comes down to IRS criteria around who is eligible to be classified as a contractor or not. There's a whole bunch of nuances that go along with it. Unfortunately, it's not a real crystal clear black and white line in the sand kind of a deal. You have to look at scheduling tools, how the money changes hands, a whole variety of things. Mainly where this comes into play is with associate dentists. And that's one where it can work, but it really has to be done a particular way, and the way that most people do it, it doesn't meet the criteria there. So if anyone out there has an associate who's an independent contractor, if you'd like to have us do a call with you to talk about it or review it, happy to do that. And it looks like we've got a question about presentation slides. Yeah, I'm happy to share some of those with folks. And then I think we might have a recording for some of this also. And let's see, then we've got a question here. Best practices for hiring dental assistants. Yeah, so so you're not having luck on Indeed. So yeah, I would say utilize anything and everything. What I always tell people for hiring is throw all of the spaghetti on the wall. So if Indeed isn't working, try whatever you can. and think as outside the box as you can. I mean, we're seeing more and more companies like used to be Temp Me, now it's Got You. There's a bunch of these companies now where it's like Uber for hiring, where you get on the app and you say, I want a dental assistant tomorrow. But they do permanent hiring as well. And so some folks I know have had luck with those. Some folks have had luck with specialists in their area and kind of, spreading the word that way. Some people will go and try to hire from outside of dental, depending on what the position is, not as readily with dental assistants. But yeah, it's just one of those things where I would just say try everything, because some things work in some areas and in some areas they don't. I know some people have tried ZipRecruiter. Some people have had good luck with Dental Post. So yeah, just try anything and everything you can, and just see. You may find something in your area that just works better than others.
Where do you find someone to help you wordsmith a really good advertisement that would attract good candidates? This seems like a tough thing for a lot of us accountants and dentists who maybe aren't the best wordsmiths in the world.
Yeah, that one is tough, because I mean, you can certainly, whether you get a framework from something on the internet or use ChatGPT, or you reach out to a company like ours for some tips. I mean, you can get a basic outline of it, but I think one of the things that I would recommend really emphasizing is talk about the employee experience, because ultimately that's what the job applicants really care about, is what is the experience like? What are they going to experience on their first day? What sort of career opportunities and growth opportunities are there? Again, just what does it feel like working as an employee in your practice? What are the other team members like? And I think really emphasizing some of the things we talked about tonight, like having a program for appreciation, having even just basic things like you have your ducks in a row from a policy manual. You can emphasize that we have our ducks in a row and we're in compliance. Those kinds of things do make a difference, because there are a lot of hot mess practices out there, and some workers have worked for those, and they may say, you know what, been there, done that. I want to work for a practice that has their stuff together. So I think emphasizing that is great. Looks like we have a question. Best way to onboard new employees in terms of going over the employee manual, pretty lengthy. Yeah, so what I recommend there is, when you sit down with a new person, it is nice to review some of the key policies, and that'll vary a little bit from practice to practice. Employees are obviously going to pay very close attention to the benefits, because that certainly impacts them directly. Some offices, for example, have had issues in the past with employees who are using their cell phones constantly. So maybe that's a policy that you really emphasize, and you say, look, whatever you happened at your previous employers and whatever they did at our practice, this is how we do it here. Certainly things like anti-harassment, discrimination, you should have a policy in there about who people report problems to. So make sure that it's really clear that, especially if you're a bigger practice and you have multiple layers of management, make sure people know who they're supposed to go to when they have a question or an issue. And so, yeah, just some of those things around what is the best, for your office, and some issues maybe that you've had in the past, or things like that. And also certainly things like mission, vision, values, purpose. Those should be in the manual. They should be posted elsewhere in the practice. And absolutely make sure that's a big part of the onboarding process with a new person. And the other thing too, I'll say, Jessica, to your point, is it is a lengthy process with some of this, and I think that's part of this idea of taking your time with onboarding. And maybe you cover the manual on the first day, maybe you cover the manual on the second day. Maybe the job descriptions are a little bit later in the process, but just make sure that you're not overloading people with too much, and you're stirring in some good fun stuff in there as well. Let's see, AM, the cost of the HR director package. So On our website, benterickson.com, we've got the pricing there. It varies a little bit based on how many employees you have, but I'll just throw out one number here. So if you are a small practice, you have less than 15 employees, one location, the full price for that is $3,895. That's the total fee for all of the setup and one full year of updates and HR specialist support. And then after that first year, the ongoing support would just be $795 per year after that. So it's very reasonable on an ongoing basis. And for those of you that are attending this webinar live, there is a $200 discount for the next 2 weeks. So if you'd like to sign up for the HR Director package, you can save $200 for the next 2 weeks. And then let's see, are you looking to have your in-person conference? Oh, yeah. So the last couple of years we did an HR conference. We did it in Denver in person for a couple of days. It was a real fun thing. It was all about HR and everything. And this year we unfortunately had to cancel that just due to some issues with the hotel and some timing stuff and all that. What we're planning to do more instead is what we're calling People Power. And there's some info on our website about this. It's a 2-day, real intimate training course of the real nuts and bolts of HR. Like, how do you hire? How do you fire? How do you handle a pregnancy? It really covers the entire world of HR management at a nice medium level. And we're real close to announcing our dates for 2025. We'll be doing a whole bunch of them all over the country. So hopefully we can line up with some times that you guys are available. And so, yeah, happy to talk more about that too. And again, there'll be some info on our website about that. And then let's see, Phil says staff loyalty, office members bouncing around. Yeah, again, that idea of, if they come for money, they'll leave for money. We're definitely still seeing that. I would say that we're not seeing as much bouncing around as we did in 2020 and 2021. So we're seeing a little bit less of it. But there are definitely those employees out there who their biggest priority is money. And they don't really think about culture. They don't think about the whole benefit package as a whole. And so unfortunately, we are still seeing that with some folks. But I do think that we're seeing more stabilization. And I think that now it's just really about investing in that long game and that idea of culture and appreciation and all of those things that will really have folks want to stick around for the long term and also make your practice as attractive as possible for folks out there that are looking. So, yeah.
Makes me think about benefits a little bit, specifically retirement plans, and the importance of, an orientation for employees when they come on board with the whole office policy. But when we set up a 401k plan, most of them have eligibility requirements. And then once you're eligible for the plan and putting money away for yourself and having the practice put money away for you, you have a vesting schedule. Mm-hmm. And employees, who leave before they're fully vested, leave a lot of money on the table. Now, mm-hmm. that doesn't include their salary deferrals, their 401k deferrals, because that's their money. It also does not include any safe harbor matching that is done by the practice. But profit sharing contributions, you have to vest in those over generally a 5-year period of time. So someone who's leaving for better benefits might need to be told what they're leaving on the table.
For sure. Yep. And I think that's a great thing to bring up in the onboarding process. And, whether you work with one of you guys or somebody, just, educating folks about what they have and the importance of investing in their future. Very critical. Yeah. Yep. Oh, yeah. Valerie Romero just commented there. Valerie's wonderful. Valerie's a practice coach, and we worked with Val for a long time. She's out of Colorado Springs in Colorado. And Val, thank you. Val's wonderful. And worked with Val for a long time. Yeah.
So I had a client situation many years ago, I'm going to say 15 years ago. And the doctor called me up and explained that she was in the middle of a procedure. And our dental assistant just stood up, said, "I can't work here anymore. I quit," and walked out. The doctor just ran regular payroll, which was, maybe the following week. And the letter from the EDD came with, you didn't pay your employee properly when they left your employment. So, Alan, maybe talk about what is the timing required for someone's final paycheck?
Yeah, great point, Hayden. Yeah, so that's one that varies widely from state to state. So the example you gave is California, because in California, if somebody is terminated, the paycheck is due immediately. If they quit with less than 72 hours notice, then the paycheck is due within 72 hours. And so if you wait until the next payday, depending on when that is, then you're late. And in California's case, they actually have a really hefty penalty wage too, where if it's not paid on time, you owe that employee effectively their daily rate, what they normally earn for a day. You owe them that daily rate for each day until they are finally paid. Other states have different rules. Some states you can just wait and pay them on the next regular payday. But it is important to know that. And sometimes people will say, well, this employee didn't return the uniforms or something, or they didn't turn in their key. So can I withhold their final paycheck until they turn that stuff in? And the answer is no. Those state rules around when the final paycheck is due, those are absolute. You cannot delay that, even if somebody doesn't give you the keys or the uniform back. And that does sometimes bring up the question of, can you deduct the cost of those things from their final paycheck? That's another thing that varies widely from state to state. Some states allow you to do it if you get something in writing. Some states categorically do not allow it at all. So you just gotta learn your individual state rules there. Looks like Mark has a question. Do you also do HIPAA compliance? No. So with OSHA and HIPAA, those are two areas that we don't do. We leave those ones up to folks that just love to live and breathe those worlds. I'll give you a couple quick names. One is Linda Harvey and the Linda Harvey Group out of Florida. They do great work in HIPAA. Also, Amy Wood and Copper Penny Consulting. Amy Wood does phenomenal work around HIPAA and cybersecurity and all that fun stuff. And with OSHA, there's Mary Gavoni and Associates. She does some really great work around OSHA and infection control. So yeah, there's a lot of great resources out there in those worlds, but we kind of stay on our lane in the HR compliance world.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Alan, thanks so much for doing this. I know I appreciate it very much, and I know those clients of mine who are on the webinar do as well. I just think it's really important to emphasize this intersection between practice consulting and accounting and financial planning. It's one of the many pieces of the puzzle that docs need to be able to put together. So
Yep.
Thanks for doing that, and we will talk to everyone later.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you again for having me on. It was a pleasure. And yeah, it's a very important topic. I know it's not the most exciting topic. There's plenty of other things that I'm sure people would rather do with their time. But yeah, this stuff is important, especially with everything that's going on in the labor market in dental right now. So yeah, definitely something to invest some time and energy in. And I think once you get everything established, keeping it ongoing is great. So pretty easy. But yeah, thank you all for attending, and I hope everyone has a great evening.